So this is something we've been doing internally at Edgar Allan, is just coming up with a challenge that we want to solve, and then working together, working in our own kind of stream to solve it with Slater AI. It's incredible how good AI has gotten in the last little while. I've been developing to different degrees for the last 10 plus years. But it's never been easier. And it's kind of like you have a senior developer always right over your shoulder. And so if you have a question, you can ask that senior developer, and they give better answers than most developers can. So it is incredible, like what we're capable of. But in order to kind of leverage that capability, you do have to know some basics. The AI responds with often more generic answers. And so unless you tell it exactly like what the element is you're selecting, and everything around that, then like, if you're very specific in how you prompt the AI, then you can get specific answers back. But a lot of times it's easier to just write a generic prompt, get that code back, and then make minor updates to that code. So we will be working with this form right here, and we're going to be writing validation. But before we jump into this, I do want to open the floor up to any QA. So if you guys have any questions around Slater specifically or around JavaScript, let's bring those up now. Anything? Fine if not. Okay, so has anybody ever written validations for forms?
Yeah, I've done some bits of it.
Okay. And tell me about that. Do you use a library, or have you done it by hand?
I was kind of doing it by hand and just like whatever Stack Overflow was telling me. It was more regex stuff. But I was also wary of it because for email addresses and stuff like that, it preventing, some things from being recognized and whatnot. So
yeah, when I write validation for forms, I tend to just do presence, like is there a value in that form field?
Okay.
A lot of times making sure it's a valid email address or valid web URL is great. And yeah, regex it's a foreign language. It's like an alien language. Again, Slater AI or ChatGPT make it much easier. So let's start into this. So first off, this is my own instance of the JS Ed project. You'll notice I have this global going here. So one of the things that we've added to Slater, which is not yet in production, but will be coming soon, is we're tying these projects to a specific Webflow project. And speaking of regex, something I just did was we need to know the Webflow project name, but of course you can paste in like the Webflow URL, and the regex just takes all that out, and it handles a bunch of different cases. So if I just do this, or if I do something like that, it's able to sense like what is the project name within that. And it's not something I could ever write on my own, but let me just show you kind of what this looks like. So this is the pattern that Slater AI wrote for me. So it's like, and the nice thing about it too is it explains like what all these characters do. Like this is the start of the string. This is saying there's an optional HTTP or HTTPS, something like that. Like, yeah, before AI, like I swear there's probably like 5 people who could actually write regex, and then the rest of us just copy it from Stack Overflow and hope it works. So, okay, so I've got this tied to this project. And so when I come in here, I can just use this single script, and this has been updated to, let's show you that actual script. So here is the key piece of what loads. So I've got the different pages within my project. So when I create a new page, I can give it a name, and I can set what page I want it to load for. So what we're doing is we're concatenating all of that JavaScript. So if it's a global page, or if it's global script that does not have a page attached to it, this will load on every single page. If it's only for the art page, then it will load the art only when the path name includes art and cards, and this would be the index page. And so now you can add your script to your global footer, and then you don't have to go back and make sure that you have the right one in. You can just create your files, delete your files from here, and update your files, and it just all works. So cool. So I am going to create a new page, and let's call this the forum page, and we'll have it load on the forum. So for you, grab your script tag and go to Webflow. You can put it in the global footer if you like, and it will just load on every page, or you can just put it on this specific page. A lot of times it's probably best to put it on the specific page, just because you don't necessarily want that form code to load on every single page, because it will potentially break the code if, for example, an element that you select is not on that page. Let me delete this actually. Okay, cool. So is everybody up to speed? You about ready to start writing some prompts for the AI? Okay, so let's start writing. So you can slide this panel out if you want more space. I am not great at prompt writing. So this is like the great reset. So I've been coding for all these years, and now AI comes out, and being a good prompt writer can kind of make you better than a seasoned developer in a lot of ways. But let's see what we can do. So I'm going to say I have a form with the ID of, so I'm going to try to be specific to get a more specific answer. I would like to validate the presence of a value on every field that has a required attribute. I'm just going to go with that. Let's see where we get. And I would say don't watch me so much as like, let's start trying to solve the problem. So start writing your own prompts, and we can kind of all be working in parallel. And as you run into problems or questions, let's actually debug those issues in real time. Embarrassing. My staging is broken. So I may have to move over to production. Yes, my staging is broken. Darn it. Okay, so give me a second to just move over. I just deleted the code that was in there before, so I'm going to go to Slater.js class.
Jared, just in case like people are watching this for the first time, what the problem is that you need it to be the production script in Webflow in order for Slater to actually work. Is that just a kind of what you're doing, just for anyone that's seeing this for the first time?
Well, so the problem was I pushed some stuff up to staging. So when you're doing app development, you have development where you're writing your code locally. So I have like a local server that's running. Once you're ready to test that code on a live server, you push it up to staging. And staging is just a place to QA everything. And then once you're feeling good about what's in staging, you push it to production. And whatever I was playing around with yesterday, I broke my AI code. And so that's not working. So I'm just quickly switching over to production, where the AI should be working. And so I just added the production code back to this form page.
Awesome.
If you're just getting started with writing code in Slater, the best thing you can do is just write a console.log and make sure that your code is loading. So you'll notice this right here, that's my code. So I know that the code that I'm writing in this sorry, I wrote in the wrong one. It says staging still. Let me close those down. So here, let's say hi from prod. And now, yeah, so this hi from prod right here means that the script is actually loading, and now I can go in and start writing this. I'm just going to go. Okay, so now I'm just going to go write my prompt again. So help me write validation for form with the ID of, grab the ID. I would like to validate the presence of a value for all fields that have the required attributes. Okay. One thing, everybody on the call, just a quick check. What level are you when you, in regards to JavaScript? Do you feel like you're a beginner, intermediate, advanced? Okay.
Yeah, maybe between beginner and intermediate, if that's like the...
Cool. What I see with this response is this is raw JavaScript, so it's not using jQuery. I find for when you're getting started with JavaScript, specifically in Webflow, using jQuery's good rule of thumb. And the reason is jQuery just makes writing JavaScript easier. So I'm going to just reprompt this by saying, thanks, and you use jQuery. And the nice thing is, like, this is a conversation that you're having with the AI. So it's going to take all of these prior responses and it's going to send it back up to the AI and get a response based on that. There are times where you're going down a path and you find that the AI is not solving the problem for you. And if that's the case, then you want to clear the chat out and start over because it won't be using those prior prompts and responses to shape the answer. Cool. So this is the same solution, but now it's using jQuery. So for example, this is selecting that ID, whereas this is the more kind of raw JavaScript way of doing it, document query selector, and then getting that ID. And if we want to, we can talk about the differences. I think the biggest thing for me is when you select something, it adds it as a jQuery object. And when you write an event on that, it will write it on all of the elements within that object. And so if you're doing that with just raw JavaScript, then you actually have to like write for loops in order to handle those events on each of the different elements. There's also like you have to write some error handling. So if this element is not on the page, then it will break your code if you're not writing something saying like, if the form exists, do this. So generally speaking, this is just much simpler to work with in my mind. So I can either just drag this onto the editor, or you can do this copy. And let's see how far this gets us. Okay. This was a problem I ran into last time I did this exercise with the internal team. Does anybody have an idea of what's wrong here? So my biggest headaches with JavaScript and Webflow is running into Webflow.js. And so we're running on this submit function. So this is the submit event, but Webflow.js also is working off of that submit. And so our JavaScript is kind of getting overridden, or the Webflow.js is taking precedence. And so our event's not firing. So what I can do here is I can do a click event instead of the submit event. But if I'm doing the click event, I don't want to do it on the form. I want to do it on the form button. So I can just grab this W button, and this will say, okay, this is within the form, and this is the specific button, specific class. So now it's always good to kind of check that things are working. So let's write a console log on that. And now when we run it, okay, so I'm running into an error. Oh, does anybody see what the issue is there? There's a typo.
The W button.
Yeah, let's see if we can debug it with Slater. So there seems to be a space between W form and W button. The space is causing the selector to look for an element with class W button. So descendant to fix this. It does tell us the right answer. So there's like this period was in the wrong place. So now we try again, and button is clicked. So it's kind of working, right? We've got name is required. It's not the best UX though, so let's make some improvements. Before we move on, how are your responses, and have you been able to solve it to a degree? One of the interesting things about AI is we can send the same prompt in, but we may get different answers. They may be slightly different, or they may be vastly different. It all has to do with the prompt. And we set, so there's a parameter you can send in there, which is something like creativity. I've set the creativity to essentially 0. So we should be getting very similar results most of the time. But they will change a good bit just based on the prompt. Cool.
On your prompt, you're using like required fields. I was just using the validate each field in the form. What's the reasoning behind the required? Are you setting a specific required field, or?
Yeah, the really nice thing about this is, so right now I only have required, I think, on this first one. Yeah, so this is the only required field in here. If I go into my form, let's pop in here.
Oh, and that's using Webflow's required functionality?
Exactly.
Okay.
So I can just toggle on this. And this might complicate our solution a little bit because this is a select. But let's start working through that. But there's no reason you have to use this. This is the HTML required, which is recommended, I'm sure, because it's the proper HTML way of doing things. But you could have a required class and base it off that required class just as well. So nice. So now when I submit name, I believe I should say team. Oh, I think it's just stopping the code after that first one. So how would you improve this validation? So first thing I would make sure it's not the alert. There's nothing worse than getting an alert. So I think what would be better is if we just added an error class to this field, and then if we added an error message below the field. So I could write that, but let's continue to work with the AI. So thanks, this is working instead of using the alert. So using alert. And you add a error class to the field and add an error message with the class of error message to the below. The AI is not always the fastest. OpenAI is still having issues with sometimes overusage. And so I have seen that it goes down from time to time, like you probably have seen with ChatGPT. But here we have an answer. So I'm going to just, I'm going to do this here. So drag this on. But I do want to keep this click event as opposed to this submit. And I'll get rid of the rest. Okay, so let's look at this answer. So on the click event, we're going to get the required fields. So this is the jQuery selector for the required attribute. And we're going to write a for loop. So in this case, let's just quickly do console.log required fields dot length. And I want to move this. Oh, I can just click the submit button. Okay, there's only one required field. So that's, am I in the right? I thought I set this to required. Did I not publish? Make sure I publish. Let's try publishing again if I didn't. Anyway, it's reporting back one field, so we're going to do that loop once. We should do that loop twice now. And if there's no value, so we're getting the value of that. I'm noticing this is still, it's like this is a pure JavaScript way of doing it as opposed to the jQuery way of doing it, but we'll let that slide for now. But it's saying, okay, here's the field and get the value of that field. And if there's a value, then it's going to be true. If there's no value, it's going to be false. And so we're doing this thing, and that's saying like the opposite. So if there's no value, then it's a false. But by that bang, we're setting it to true. And so we're getting added into this block. And the first thing we do is we add the class error to that field. And then we do this after. And then we run this return, which stops the code from running. So we'll probably want to remove this in a bit once we add additional required fields. But so let me just try. Okay, so for whatever reason, I didn't publish that first time. But now on this select, we have this required attribute. So when I run this, because it has that return, it's stopping the code there. And so we're not getting it on this second one. And we have this other problem is if I keep hitting this, then I get more and more of these error messages, which I only want one. Let's have the AI fix that for us. Can you make sure that the error message is removed after each time I submit the form. Is there another thing? Can you also make sure that the form validates on all fired fields? We'll see if that second sentence makes it change this piece. Because when I submit, I want an error to be thrown on the first and second field. Okay. So let's do that. So, okay, so we have required fields, is valid true. This is the key piece for fixing that problem we had before. Every time you click the submit button, we'll just remove all of the error messages, and then we'll add them back if they're needed. The other nice thing is you'll notice that return was removed, and so our code will loop through as many times as it needs to. So this is looking pretty good. Before we walk through it, let's just see where we're at. Perfect. So we're getting those on both of them. If I submit it a number of times, it's not adding more messages. There's a couple improvements we could make. You'll notice there's an error class on this input. So if we went into our Webflow project and added an error class to maybe put a red border around it, that red border would show up. So we're in pretty good shape here. One thing that I would like to do now is if I start writing something, this error message is still there. So let's make it so that it removes the error when we start typing in the field. I always like to be real peppy with the AI for when it takes over. So next I do, can you make the error, or let's say, can you remove the error class and error message when the user types something? And you'll notice here I'm using kind of really regular language. I could and I should be more specific, but I kind of want to represent like what someone who knows very little JavaScript would do. But as you get more familiar, like I know that I want to use the input event. And so let's see what it comes back with. The more specific you can be about what you want, the better it is. But even when you just write very kind of common layman's language, it still comes back with really good results. Okay. So the key piece is here. You'll notice it's writing an input event. So on input is what we do want. And it removes those values. So let's see if that works. It's looking pretty good. Nice. Yeah, perfect. What do you think? Are there other improvements you'd like to see with your validation? Do you guys want to try a regex? Should we say the name has to not have any numbers, perhaps? Let's try that. Can you improve the, say, so I'm going to get the ID, the name field. I'd like to ensure that the user doesn't include numbers or special characters. Even last year, I had to write a bunch of validation for a form. And it was such a pain. I could have done it in like an hour with the AI. So it is really like having superpowers, and like having to write regex and search for a good regex pattern on Stack Overflow. It's just not fun. So I've been interacting with this quite a bit too, and the drag and drop is really nice. But sometimes you just want to take a piece of it. So I'll be making updates so that there's like maybe the top section is drag and drop, but the rest is something you can copy and paste, like highlight, copy and paste. Okay, so let's look at this answer. This is all the same. Here we're looping through the required fields. This is all the same. Maybe not the cleanest code because it just adds this down here. But it kind of looks like it's going to work. So here it's using regex. Let's actually look and see. Note that the regular expression used here only allows uppercase, lowercase letters, and spaces. If you want to allow other characters, you may modify the regular expression. So that's pretty good. If you're just writing for just regex, I've noticed it's really nice about saying, okay, this character, which I only know this because of yesterday, means the start of a string. So it will break down like each piece of this if you want to get to know regex more and more. Okay, so if the required ID is name, and you'll notice this is not jQuery, it's using raw JavaScript. Anytime you're seeing these brackets, you know it's probably using just the raw JavaScript version. This is kind of a mix of jQuery and JavaScript. It doesn't matter what you use, but just kind of understanding. Usually you want to kind of stick with a style just so people who come back later to it are able to understand what's going on. So that said another way is like you want to write good code in order to make it so that you can communicate with other developers in the future. Okay, so we have the regex. We're testing if this value matches this regex. If it does not, then we set it to is valid false. We add the class. We have this after, and this is nice because it even adds a message that's specific to that regex issue. And then it also adds this input event so that we can remove the error message if it's correct. This is looking good. So if I type 1, 2, 3 and submit, we get the correct validation. Let's say Jared Malan. Again. So yeah, that's working just as we'd hope. Test. And when we submit, that's correctly submitting. So I've got one more piece to this puzzle of what we're solving today. Now that we have this, your submission has been received. What I would like to do is I'd like to personalize this. And so I'm going to say, let's say, thank you, name. So we've got all of this code. I actually don't want to keep working on this code because I like it how it is. So I'm actually going to clear the chat out and start fresh. And I'm going to say, I've got a form on submission on, let's say, successful submission. I'd like to take the name value and add it to the success message. The success message should say, thank you, name for your submission. Add this to the, let's go back here real quick. Copy form done, div. Spell that right. This will be interesting. I imagine it will be able to pick this up, but it's quite a bit of intelligence to understand, okay, this is the name it's referred to in that name value. What are we doing here? I do need to add some error messages, error handling. If like I was saying, like sometimes it times out. If you like have it explain all of this code, it may max out the number of tokens, and so it might not give you the response you need. So anyway, but it did work. It's just not always quick. So you'll notice we've got all of this. Oh, by the way, I'm realizing there's a fix in staging that is not yet up. So you'll notice this response does look very familiar to what we had here. And the reason is because when you clear this chat, it clears what you see, but it's actually sending up all of those prior chats as well. So that bug is resolved in staging and will be pushed this week. Okay, so the piece I want to get is just this here. So if it is valid, then do this. I'm going to copy that over and put it here. Oops. And we're getting that name value. That looks correct. And then we're adding the W form done. Yeah, see like how it has this exactly kind of how I prompted it. So let's give it a go. Thank you, Jared, for your submission. Success, we did it. So I think that's a pretty good form. I'm sure there's other improvements. Some people like to have this submission not clickable until all the prompts are in, or all the fields are valid. I personally don't like it. I like the user to be able to submit anytime and just get that error. You'll notice we could improve this a little bit, I guess. And the way I would do that is I would just move this piece up into this block up here. I'm not going to worry about getting that just right since it's not kind of critical. But any questions with any of that? I hope this gives you a lot more confidence in solving your problems with JavaScript, even if you're kind of at that beginner stage.
We changed the from the submit to the click. So does that changes the ability to like hit enter for submitting the form for a user, correct?
No, it should be the exact same for the user. The only difference is if this is a submit, the event is happening when the submit event is occurring in the browser. But because Webflow.js is taking over that submit event, we just can't interact with it. So this is just putting us one step ahead in that line. And so we're stopping the form before it actually submits. Does that make sense?
So an actual, like when you're actually going through a form, if somebody like, because people sometimes hit like enter before the form is finished or something like that.
Yeah, it's a good. I don't know exactly with multiple fields how that would happen. It does look like just hitting enter on name is triggering the Webflow validation here. So we could write a little bit of extra JavaScript to handle that. Yeah, if we had a form with just an email, I would definitely want to handle it where the enter submits the form. With a multi-field form, just pressing enter seems maybe not what I want. But yeah, it's a good point you bring up. It's something I've never really noticed. Would you like to kind of talk about how you would solve that?
Yeah, I'm just curious because sometimes for accessibility, for people having trouble using forms and stuff like that, so it's just.
Yeah, I mean, you can still tab through.
You can still tab through and hit enter, right?
Hitting the enter, though, it does. So we do need to add. Yeah, it's a very good point. Like we don't support that right now. So let's see what the AI says. We can't use the submit event, but we want to support clicking enter to submit the form. Yeah, so with Webflow.js, there's a few places where I run into it. Form submission is one of them. Probably the bigger problems I've had is around the tab component. Like you kind of have to work with it because it's going to be adding, like when you change the tab, you can do that with JavaScript, but that clicking it does like 4 different things. And so the way I handle it now is I just say, I get that tab element and I say click on it. And then it runs the Webflow.js of doing those 4 different things. And then there's been some times where I've actually had to like write a mutation observer. So saying like something in the DOM is changing and I want to run a event when that happens. That gets really hairy, and hopefully there's better solutions than doing that. But okay, so this is a decent answer, but not a full answer. So what we're saying is on input, key press, run that function. Yeah, so what I would do here is like we need to support the click, and we also need to support the key press. And so you can move all of this code into its own function. And then you can have like the multiple ways of doing this. So I'm kind of breaking the JavaScript to a degree, but this should probably move into here. And so I can use this as well. And this is where I'm going to have to toy with it. So this may solve it, but it likely will need a little bit more work. I imagine I'll be running into issues. Yeah. So submit form. Yeah, this is me not writing a function correctly. Is that right? Okay, so now I can submit. And I'm getting overwhelmed by Webflow.js again. Yeah, this is, I've broken it. So I'm not going to try to fix it all right now. But Jeremy, you bring up a good point, and I will come back to you with a solve for kind of handling that.
Well, I know it is. It's not just with this. It's with trying to do it with anything. Like when I've been using Wiz and stuff like that. It's like anytime you're trying to overwrite the Webflow kind of way form and stuff like that, it gets complicated.
Yeah. I'm just trying to go back to my last state. So this should be it. So this answer is 90% of the way there. But yeah, I will essentially the direction I was going is right. Like I just need to move everything into a function, and then I have to like write events to those different ways of submitting the form. But yeah, it's
on one of my forms that I tried this before, prevent default work with enter as well. So I have like prevent default for the on click button, and then it also works when you click enter. And then yeah, if validation is okay, then you can submit the form.
Yeah, so we don't have prevent default until clear down here. And so that's just removing the default behavior of that element. In this case, it would be that default behavior of a form button.
Can I ask a couple of boring, well, not boring, but
any other questions?
You know, you're very advanced. One, multi-step forms, just intrigued. Like, obviously, you've just got the regular form, Webflow's native forms. But, like, maybe this is more of a UI UX question, but like the advantage of having a multi-step form is that you can basically collect their email at the start of the form, and then that will save so that when they return, they can carry on using the multi-step form. Is that the key benefit of actually just doing this generally, like, you know, so that you can build this in Slater?
Yeah, it's a good question of how you want to go about that. This is not live right now because they're not in a recruiting season, but this is let me just publish this to the, let me just see if it's at live. No, it is. Yeah, so I'm just going to publish this to staging real quick. If you want to join Sequoia's like startup program, this is the way to do that. So if you have a server, you could send up that data kind of one field at a time. Like you could send up the email, go to the next page, send up whatever else. With Webflow, you're more limited. So in theory, you could have like the first form being just to send up the email, the second form to capture some other data. And you could go step by step submitting data for each of those forms. Obviously, if you go to the setup, the site settings, you're going to have to think about how you tie all that data together. So you might have to have like a ID that gets created. So that direction is not how I chose to do it in this particular project. So what I did is we've got all these different steps along the way. I save your answers to local storage, and then I reset local storage when this application has been submitted. And what I do is I generate this object in local storage, and I then, well, I should say, like, local storage is just if the page gets refreshed. I don't want you to have to start out at the beginning. So this local storage like will populate the field. And so this is a giant form in this tab component. And when you finally hit submit, then it sends up all that data as a single form as opposed to multiple forms.
Like, sent up as you go. But what you're saying is it's essentially all at the end after you've moved through those different.
Yeah. Yeah, it's slightly different. It's not looking like it's being submitted each step of the way to the user, because they do get here and it says hit submit to actually submit all that data. But we do handle like multi-part, and there are ways, like if I come in here, let's see, get my LinkedIn. This is kind of obnoxious. But I do validate that it's an actual LinkedIn URL because they run your URL, your LinkedIn, through some algorithm, and that actually gives them information about you, not just like your LinkedIn profile, but like who you're connected to and different things. But if I am not in Europe for this particular one, then we send them off into a different path, and so I'm still able to submit some of that data as you submit it here. So there's multiple ways of submitting the data. But yeah, it's not easy. Like there were a lot of things to think about because saving it to local storage is important, because it's a super long form. It's probably something you don't get through your first set.
Like why you
the first time you're working on it.
For this use case, but that answers a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And then my follow-up question is, if you wanted to do animations, I've been speaking to Jeff McAvoy about his crazy Rive times Slater thing, and we were talking about animating like a little surfer throughout a form, so you could have like a Slater kind of animated something at each of the like multi-step stages this person could do. I'm just intrigued how animations work with Slater. I mean, obviously, Jeff's thing is an extreme example. You just try and do like the error message pop up or something. Would you see all the JavaScript in Slater and then animations, if they're just simple animations,
Yeah. There's a lot of different approaches, and I know Jeff works with Rive, which I don't know anything about. When I'm doing kind of CSS animations, the thing that I think is most useful is just adding and removing classes and having the CSS do the work of animating it. There, you can write JavaScript to, say, move an element from one space to the next. But it's much more performant to use CSS to do that animation. If you're working with something with Rive or like Lottie, I'm not the guy to ask about those type of solutions, just because I haven't worked with them. Well, we're at time, but any last questions? So to recap, I just hope that you guys feel much more emboldened to kind of solve JavaScript problems. Because it is in the last 6 months, everything's changed, and it's more easy than ever to to be a developer. And with Webflow, you're a visual developer. What you actually have to do with JavaScript is fairly limited. Like it's a lot of interacting with the DOM, maybe passing data through a form. But those things are much more approachable now. So love to hear any successes you have with writing JavaScript. If you run into any problems, let me know, and happy to chat with you about them.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.
Jared, just final question. Next week,
Well, good seeing everyone.
we'll do another office hours at the same time, just in case anyone here is like, cool, we're on a roll. What's next?
Yeah. So we'll keep these going. I think this is going to be the time. Let us know if it's good or bad. Maybe we'll be able to move it around, but I think this is a pretty good time. We've done it pretty early for my time, so that if you are in here, it's somewhat reasonable. But next week, what we'll probably do, I really like doing kind of these challenges together, where hopefully I didn't get to see anybody's work, but hopefully you're solving the problem at the same time. And probably what we'll do next week is we'll probably start working with a tab component and potentially doing a multi-step form. So cool. Well, good seeing everyone.